individuals successfully at therapeutic phases. Yeah, you don't want to make them more angry or agitated. And what do you think is one of the key items or key values that you need to have to develop a good therapeutic relationship with your psychiatric patients? The key attribute that you need to have.
Trust.
Yeah, very good. Trust. Trust is one of the main things that your psychiatric patients are looking for with developing therapeutic communication. What the heck? Okay. So whenever you're developing this good rapport with your patients, you want to make sure that you're identifying the main problem that that individual has, and that you're trying to explore solutions and create good individualized goals for that patient. And you want to do this by creating and utilizing interpersonal communication skills to build a meaningful relationship so that, as you said, that individual trusts you. So when you look at the types of communication skills that you want to embody when you're working with patients, is you want to understand that the interactive process that you have with that patient, that it's really meaningful between yourself and that other individual, and that that individual has to trust you and be able to confide in you and on a level that they haven't before with other individuals, that it's going to be difficult because with that you're going to have to set firm boundaries and be able to set goals and interventions to help them move forward with their treatment. So when you look at communication, what do you guys define interpersonal communication as? How do you guys define interpersonal communication?
People, or how you relate to others.
Mm-hmm. How do you relate to other people? What else? Do you think you use it in everyday life? Do you think this is something that's difficult for your psychiatric mental health patients? Why do you guys think that it's something that's difficult for your mental health patients?
Well, because if they don't trust you, they're not gonna everybody just can't open up. There's not the mindset to form a healthy relationship or communicate effectively.
Yeah, people that are struggling with active psychosis and some of these other mental health disorders, it can be very difficult for them to open up to you, and they haven't been able to experience just a normal conversation in everyday life, and so this is something that's going to be very new for them. You definitely want to take note that when you're talking about communication skills and interpersonal communication, that they utilize a transactional model. And that's utilized to engage and create a meaningful relationship. So if you saw this come up later, that would be something that you want to take note of. So when you're looking at the way communication interacts with the conditions and surroundings that individuals are in, you have to look at the background of the individual and look at their personal values, attitudes, and beliefs. And so when we talked about ethics and the ethical perspectives related to psychiatric mental health nursing, we talked a little bit about values, attitudes, and beliefs. So what do you guys think about attitudes, values, and beliefs, and how that relates to someone's communication with other people? How do you think that impacts communication? Does it have really any impact on communication? Does it play a role? Yes, no, maybe? Yeah.
I think so. No, I'm not talking.
Yeah, either or. Go ahead.
What they choose to emphasize in their communication, so what they value, they'll emphasize that more heavily in their communication than something they don't.
Yeah, most definitely. What else?
What you
Doesn't matter, just talk on.
If you sort of know what they value, then you'll be able to structure your conversation along lines that are more meaningful to them.
Yeah, you'll be able to better set interventions for the individual. It can also help define who is going to interact with that patient more. If somebody has cultural values, like I said to another, one of the sections, if somebody comes in and they have a very strict cultural value because they may be Middle Eastern or they have a specific religious preference, like this has happened to me on units before. You know, certain religions and cultures just don't like gay people. Well, if I'm the only nurse on the unit, I'm gonna be all you have to deal with that night as far as an assessment goes. So we're just gonna have to work through it, you know, gays away if I'm also on the unit, so sorry for your luck. But, you know, you get through the initial assessment, but then I might not be the best person for them to interact with, you know, in subsequent days or nights whenever I'm working on the unit, so you might wanna have another nurse be the one that interacts with that individual. So something to take note of is who's the main person that shapes individuals' attitudes or values of belief? What happens? Who's the one that really makes individuals think a certain way and shapes that opinion that they have? Yeah, their parents or what they're exposed to in society. So when you look at a lot of individuals that, even individuals that are struggling with psychosis, but especially some of your borderline personality disorders, your major depressive disorders, they've probably experienced some type of what in their history? Yeah, some type of significant trauma in their history. So you have to be aware of that and aware that you might be reminding them of something or someone that they've dealt with in the past. And you're fighting against a lot of that. And so you have to be aware of that when you're shaping their goals and your interventions to help them move past what they're dealing with. So when you're looking at communication and you're looking at the different aspects that impact communication, so certain things that impact communication are social status and gender. Individuals would say certain things whenever you're trying to communicate with them. So you have to be aware of body posture, how you carry yourself, because you want to be able to relate to individuals and be able to have an open demeanor. Also, some individuals are either more comfortable or less comfortable with individuals of a certain gender. And you convey information in different ways. And some people have experienced trauma or abuse from certain members of the opposite or same sex. So when you're looking at age or developmental level with communication, obviously adults and adolescents are going to communicate differently, but does it always conform to what you, the outward appearance of what you see? Or are adults always going to communicate in an adult-like fashion? So you have to be aware that your psychiatric mental health patients aren't always going to have high IQs and aren't always going to function at the level of what they look like. And so sometimes you're going to have to break things down and explain things in a way that's more appropriate for how the patient might be cognitively functioning. So why is environment important whenever you're communicating with somebody? How does that play a role? Because environment can be extremely important in shaping the way you communicate and shaping how an interaction takes place or the way something ends up going and how things turn out. How is that important and why is it important?
It's like a group, people might be less willing to share things like personal things, whereas
Yeah.
if it's just one-on-one, they're willing to share.
People can be less willing to share. How else? Say that someone's getting aggressive or getting ramped up. How else could it play a role? Go ahead.
I was gonna say that like in a loud or chaotic environment, it might trigger those like aggressive, hostile behaviors.
Yeah, triggering is a big thing with environment. So say you're in the hospital setting. All of us are in the hospital setting with clinicals and stuff. So whose setting, whose environment is that really for? Whose side are, you know, whose playing field is that? It's obviously towards, you know, the healthcare provider because it's our hospital, you know, so we're shaping that environment. So whenever the patient's acting out, we obviously want to try and make the environment as comfortable as possible for the patient. So what are some things that you can do to help the patient feel more comfortable when you're trying to redirect them? or try and get a point across. What are some things you can do to help the environment be a little more therapeutic?
Maybe have some options.
Have some options.
Different things that they could do, maybe.
Yeah, so when you said deviate, what are some,
Something like
that's a
the
good
really
word.
tense stuff, you know, like what if you had a little art, what if you had something that you
Yeah.
wanted to do, or they could go play basketball, or they could do something to relax and release.
Yeah, so different activities for them to do, and if they're becoming more wound up, or they're starting to increase and become more volatile, you could simply try and move them to a different area. Get patients away from them, you know, make them feel a little bit more secure. Just redirect them to a different area. Don't try and reprimand them in front of others. You know, actually try and make them a little bit more secure and show them a little bit of attention. So whenever you talk about personal interactions in space, a lot of times patients in the psychiatric mental health setting don't have any concept of what personal space is and distance is, or they do have a concept of it and they use it to be able to do what? Invade boundaries and use it as a way to intimidate. Yeah. So there's different types of distance that is utilized. You have to be comfortable but aware, because I tend to not let distance really bother me when dealing with the patient, but I also don't want to get punched in the face. So I want to keep them like intact. You know, 35 is starting to fall apart, so we want it to last as much as possible. So intimate distance, it's described as 0 to 18 inches. You know, if you're really intimate, it's like 0 to 0 feet. But personal distance, that's going to be described as 18 to 40 inches. Social distance, which this is going to be kind of, you're getting into the realm of where your patients are going to be, is 4 to 12 feet, more on the 12 feet side. And public distance is exceeding 12 feet. I like the way Central State describes it. Like at OLAP, Our Lady of Peace, they say if you're a one-to-one, you want to be arm's length away. At Central State, they say you want to be the patient's leg length away. I love that one, because if it's my arm's length or my leg's length, I'm about getting hit by everybody, because I'm short. So anybody could hit me. You could punch me. A toddler could punch me. I mean, I'm getting punched by everybody. So I'm like, this is great. The patient's leg length, I'm safe, because everybody's taller than me, and I have time to run or like jump off the wall and like bounce around, squirrel. So I'm good. So I like that definition. I'm awesome. So this was talking about kind of what a few of you mentioned whenever I was talking about what to make the client feel more comfortable. So the unit manager needs to meet with the client who is exhibiting an escalating hostility. What should be the most appropriate location for the nurse to meet with this client? So the client's room with the door shut, quiet corner of the day room, the nurse's station, or the treatment room. Feet, quiet corner of the day room. So you're separating them from the other patients, you're giving them some attention, you're still out in a public area where other people can respond to you and help you, but you're segregating the patient away, and you're talking to them, and you're trying to verbally de-escalate the situation. These other one are bad options, because you never let somebody behind the nurse's station or around, you know, out close to the nurse's station, because they can reach over and like throw a computer monitor at your head. Which does happen. We just had a nurse last weekend at Central State. She wasn't paying attention. She doesn't. She's somewhere on the spectrum anyway. This nurse is a little weird. But she wasn't paying attention to the patient. She let her guard down, and then the patient just will reach over the nurse station and hit her right on the top of the head. Like a hard hit. Cracked her skull open. Like not her skull, but the skin on her head open. She's bleeding everywhere. Don't get punched on the head. Bad thing. Always pay attention. If the nurse comes, or the patient comes up, you push away. The rolling chair, roll it on back. So, treatment room, you never want to take patients in the treatment room. It's a tiny room. You're going to get trapped in there and get beat up. And you don't go into the patient's room with the door shut, because that looks suspect. Might get thrown on the bed, so that happened to you. So you said B. So nonverbal communication. Is nonverbal communication rate just as high as verbal communication? Is it just as equally important? So why? Why is it as equally important?
It says a lot.
It says a lot.
With other words, you can pick up a lot of things just watching your posture.
So like, how would you feel about me if I came in every day? I didn't bring candy. I didn't talk to you. I didn't talk to you guys, and I just came up and there used to be a stool up here. That was what would work. But I came up every day and I just sat here. I did this. And I looked at y'all and I was like, components of nonverbal communication. You know, dress right. Have good posture, don't touch people, facial expression. And I just read straight off the slides. That's all I did. All I did.
Flashback.
What are you saying?
First of all, it would be so easy. I would love my job. Class would be over in 30 seconds. We'd be on like chapter 14 by now. Money. I didn't walk around, I just didn't care about y'all. And then I gave you super hard tests. Like, then I went back in my office and whipped out like the HESI, NCLEX, RN, pretzel, ARCs, like psychiatric mental health nurse practitioners, and I was like, question.
And then you gotta spend 3 days
Yeah, the
to
question
figure
was
out.
this long, and the rationales were this long, and I was like, let's be fair. So, I'm not that way. So, like I said, test one is worth 15% because I just want y'all to get your feet wet.
Then you're gonna show.
I'm just teasing. I can't make myself laugh. It's hard. So, you want to be aware of how you look. Like the guy, I told you guys about the rape kit guy. He's turned out to be really funny. He's actually really nice. At least I know he's not going to rape me. Or maybe he's being nice to me because he wants to. I have no idea. We're in a totally gray area right now. But at least he's not punching my face. One of the nurses, she was hilarious. She was like, a guy like that, you just lay down and act like you like it. She was like, he's a big dude. Has anyone in here had me for clinical before? I don't think. Yeah, you have. But I was our black at clinical, like Nurse Vader, so I was like running out of black. I wore all black to the hospital the other night, and I had on like a longer black lab coat. At first he called me Neo. Neo dude, like Neo dog. And then the next time he said I was looking like Blade. He said, "You open your all like Blade." And I was like, "I'll take either of those because they have special powers, and you won't be able to hurt me if you decide to lose your temper." And he was like, "I'm just playing with you, dog." Remember, special powers. Special powers. So physical appearance is important. I guess I don't want to look too like gothic at the hospital. It might freak people out. But always have an open body posture. And seem happy when you're at work. Be careful of touch, because some people have a severe trauma history, and so you want to watch that. Be aware of your affect and your facial expressions. Watch out for eye contact. And be aware of your voice and vocal cues. Try not to come off in an aggressive or demeaning manner. So moving on to therapeutic language and communication. So you always want to be aware of your verbal and nonverbal techniques. And the big thing is, we're always trying to promote that healing and change process. And with this second bullet point, we always want to motivate positive behavior. And so how can you do this? Because we've talked about in previous lectures, in the last lecture, we talked about you want to do what? Give positive what to your patient? Positive, starts with an F. Feedback. You want to give positive feedback to your patient. So giving positive feedback, does it have to be about super huge big things that you do every day? No, because what are these patients lacking? They're lacking daily what? Just the ability to do daily, pardon me?
Like functions?
Yeah, daily life skills, little things. So if you see a super psychotic patient running around, picking up little pieces of paper on the floor and trying to like throw them away or put them in their pocket, you can ask, well, what are you doing with those? Are you trying to throw those away? Spencer, I'll just call him Spencer. You trying to throw those away, Spencer? You trying to clean up? Well, if they have good behavior and no super aggressive precautions, give them a little broom, let them sweep. They're taking stuff off the tables, let them wipe things up. If you see them eating things off the floor in the little dining room, if you want some snacks, sit down at the table and let's eat the food off a plate and do things like you're supposed to, because they need to learn those types of skills if they're not aware of how to do it correctly, and then give them positive feedback and reinforcement whenever they do it correctly. And then you want to do things and to redirect them in non-judgmental. You don't want to be like, you're not supposed to do that. That's nasty. Don't eat off the floor. Do things in a non-judgmental fashion, so the patient doesn't get mad at you or want to punch you in the face for saying something demeaning towards them. So be careful. If you're too silent, a patient can take control of the discussion. Sometimes using silence is good because it lets the patient vent and get things out. So these can be an either-or type of situation. When you're accepting of what the patient says, it obviously shows positive regard for the patient. When you give recognition, it obviously shows that you're aware of what's going on and you're acknowledging the patient. So just being, of course, recognizing these definitions is all you really need to be able to do. Offering yourself or maybe self-disclosing a little bit of information, showing that you can relate to what the patient's going through. That's making yourself available to the patient and letting them be able to relate. Asking how a patient's doing when you walk on the unit, or, rounding on the patients when you're a nurse, or if you're a nursing student, when you walk onto the unit, you see patients being like, hey, how are you doing? Don't just walk on and be quiet all in a little group, all tucked together, because number one, you'll look scared. And be like, what are you guys doing for group, or what are you guys watching on TV? I love Blade 2, or whatever you're watching, who knows. It allows the patients to talk to you about something. So offering general leads and topics of conversation allows the client to engage with you. This is, placing events in time or sequence. You can reorient the client without sounding demeaning towards the client. Asking the client what they're doing or making simple observations just in real time. If the client steals something and being like, what are you doing with that in your pocket? Or why'd you pick that up? It helps, just let them know you saw what was going on and what's being observed. And why do you want to encourage description of perceptions? If they seem like they're responding to something or what's going on, why do you want to encourage them to be descriptive in what's going on in their life or their perceived reality? Yeah.
To see if they're in tune with what's going on in the environment.
Because a big thing that, and we're really focusing on it from as I've been in the hospital more from an administrative perspective, because the insurance has gotten so much more tight, the regulations have, and they're forcing people out of the hospital quicker. A lot of times there's a huge spectrum of, are the patients behaving or are they doing nothing? And then doing nothing is now looked at as what type of behavior? Just good behavior, right? Oh, they're fine. They're compliant because they're not causing any huge issues or problems. Well, are they really fine though? How many times has he walked around a unit in a circle? 54 times. He's just been walking all day. His little feet are raw. But he hasn't punched anybody, hasn't slapped anybody, and so the nurse hasn't really noticed him. Compliant. Ate. No issues. Slept. Moving on to the next. Well, yeah, but he's been pacing, he's been isolated, he hasn't spoke to anybody. Well, those are actually really symptoms of his psychosis and his schizophrenia and his schizoaffective disorder that he has. So does he really need to be discharged? No, because he's gonna get out and he's not gonna take a shower, he's not gonna eat anything. You know, he's just gonna walk around the city of Louisville until he steps out in traffic and starts mumbling to himself and then gets arrested and then comes back to Central State again. So, no, he's not really well, but nobody charts that, and so then he gets released, you know. So you gotta always try and engage the patient and say, well, he won't speak. And then you know, relay that in good documentation. You wanna encourage comparisons of data and information, trying to get the patient to do that. Trying to get them to state and reflect on what's happening. So ask them, normally you want to ask open questions, but you know, trying to reorient them and ask them direct questions about what's going on. So when you have ask focus questions, you can take note of single events or words that they're using, maybe over and over again. Because then you can focus on trigger words, like we have one patient, Miss Betty. She can be just fine, and then she'll start screaming out of her wheelchair, alert, 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 alert. That's what she does. If you know if an alert's going off, you just need to, she's going crazy. Alert. So you know that it's about to go down. She's in a wheelchair most of the time, but then when she starts having an alert, she'll jump up and slap them. Alert! Thought you couldn't walk, woman. You've been in a wheelchair all day, like Stephen Hawking, and then you jump up and you beat the hell out of somebody. You've been all fail and can't hold a straw, and then you get up and smack that someone's all red and their face is pulsating. An hour ago, you couldn't hold up a banana, like all limped over. Then you just got up and hit somebody like you're out of the X Games. It's ridiculous. Got that psychotic strength. So you want to seek clarification and validation. Have the patient try and get them to explain what's going on. And you want to clarify the misconceptions and reality. You want to try and reorient the patient. So you can see that a lot of these communication techniques are trying to ground the patient in what's going on, and trying to move them in the direction of meeting the interventions that you've set for them and to meet the goals that you've set, both in the short and long term. So it's okay to express doubt about what the patient is saying. And I see this happen all the time, that it just happened the other night. You know, you go onto a unit and patient starts talking very nonsensically and having a lot of word salad and just not making any sense. And then staff or nurses or people that aren't familiar with the patient will be like, I don't know, that sounds great, okay, bye. Well, no, tell the patient, be like, no, we're not at Wrigley Field. You're in the hospital. Do you know where you're at? You're at Central State Hospital, or you're at Our Lady of Peace. Be like, let's go talk to the nurse. I don't understand what you're saying, you know, because you're not familiar with the patient. You don't know what they're. You try and ask the nurse what's going on instead of just blowing them off, because they're obviously responding to something that you're not familiar with. But trying to get the patient to verbalize what's going on to you. Then obviously you want to always be trying to implement new interventions for the patient and decrease anxiety. This is a great question, I love it. Problem is some nurses probably done this. As the move out date to leave the shelter gets closer, a battered wife states, I'm afraid to leave here. I'm afraid for my safety and the safety of my children. Which nursing statement is most supportive? This is a difficult transition. Let's formulate a plan to keep you all safe in the community. It's a policy that the client can only live here for 30 days. Maybe we can ask for more time. You've had a month to come up with a plan for keeping you safe and your family safe. Hopefully your husband has been in counseling. I'm sure this will work out fine. Which one do you think is the best answer? A. I love this one though. Hopefully everything will be okay.
Sure.
Be careful when you turn on the lights. Let us know how it works out. If we don't hear from you in 48 hours, we'll send out someone to see. Like, maybe he's there, maybe he's not. So yes, definitely you want to utilize the therapeutic communication techniques of reflection, formulating a plan of action. So you can see how these questions can be pretty easy if you apply appropriate common sense. And then what's the general tool that you're always using? Dave, I'm gonna just put this cup up here whenever you're taking your test. So you always want to give reassurance to your patients. Because if you discourage patients, then they're probably not going to be that apt to open up to you. You don't want to reject the patient. That's probably when you need to tap out. And you don't want to overtly approve or disapprove of what the patient's doing. You want to watch other staff if they're doing that, because you don't want to pass judgments of good or bad on the behavior. You just might need to reframe what you're saying to the patient in a different way, because you want to direct them in the right direction and different interventions to shape their behavior, but you want to do it in a correct way, in a very therapeutic way. Same thing with the agreeing or disagreeing. Now, what about giving advice? What's your view on giving advice to a patient? How do you feel that you should approach that topic? Can nurses give advice? Number one. Okay, I'm seeing yes. What about giving personal advice that you just come up with? So how should we appropriately give advice as nurses?
It deals with their medical care.
Yeah, if it deals with their medical care. So the way you can appropriately give advice is the treatment team always comes up with a discharge plan or treatment goals. So if it's general advice that relates to that, or if it's good common sense advice, then yes, I say go for it. If it has to do with medication administration and compliance issues and follow-up care, appropriately going to discharge appointments, and safety issues, and things that you would feel comfortable documenting in the medical record to say that I've told this patient to be safe. I talked to them about medication education. I talked to them about follow-up appointments, things that would be appropriate for covering yourself, say if the patient went out and committed suicide or harmed themselves. Then yes, most definitely put it in. If it's personal information about their family, and things that you said, well, this time this happened to me and I did this, things that you wouldn't want to write out and let everybody know, I wouldn't say it. So that's a good kind of judge. It's good to get patients to talk about things that might be a little bit difficult because they need to reconcile themselves to issues they went through, but just be careful not to push too hard because of bringing up past trauma issues. Oh, Jesus, I forgot how many times. Watch out about this defending topic. So, whenever you get into the area of defending, so the client does have the right to criticize issues, but you always want to approach this, delicately and make sure that you're approaching everything in the most positive manner that you can. And so, asking why, how does that sound when you ask somebody why? They give you an explanation and you're like, well, why? How does that sound from a therapeutic approach? Does it sound judgmental? Sounds a little bit judgmental. So you don't ever want to ask why. You want to ask very open-ended questions, which is a very therapeutic way to be able to get information. And so you want to rephrase questions so you don't ask a why-ended question. But you can seek further information, just restate it in a different way. So never ask why. That's a good thing to remember. When we talk about faith as a form, from an ethical perspective, and forms of values, You always want to make sure that the patient is accepting responsibility for their own actions. Obviously, you don't want any belittling to happen. You want to watch out for stereotypical comments. For example, I honestly don't mind if people say stuff about me, like I've been called plenty of names, so it doesn't matter to me. I'm like, it's fine. But I set very firm rules and boundaries on the unit, especially about females. I don't like and racist comments. I hate the N-word, even if it's African Americans saying things about African Americans and using the A on the end of the N-word. Like if they're talking to each other, I don't allow that. So I'm very firm about, and I hate it when people belittle women, like say B, like call women like bitch. I hate that. So if they do that, like that'll end up in we have disciplinary action for that. They'll sit firm and like go to your room. And that's about all you can do. And if they yell back at you, you're like, okay, well, still go to your room. And then you just have to turn the TV off. That's not showing me backup. They say they won't go to the room. You're like, fine, no TV. Start keeping your cheeses. Yeah, that's all the power we have. And then you're like, I took a swing at me. Now I get to give you a shot. But so be careful if they're making stereotypical comments. But follow through with whatever boundaries that you set. And then using denial. Make sure that the patient's aware of what's happening, and then don't let the patient live in a state of denial. You can interpret things that the patient's been telling you, but if you feel uncomfortable with this, there's always therapists that are around to be able to help you in this area. And then introducing unrelated topics. Don't let the patient drag you off topic, and you yourself obviously don't want to veer off topic when you're discussing things with the patient. Because again, patients are very concrete in their thinking and will shift from topic to topic. Number one, in order to manipulate you, and two, simply because their mind's racing. So the nurse is performing an initial assessment on a newly admitted client who is oriented ×4. Which of the following communication techniques would best facilitate obtaining accurate and complete client data? A new throat. Open-ended, crap, I just told you. Close-ended questions, requesting an explanation, open-ended questions, or interpreting. I was on my peak physical health during that reading. Open-ended questions. So what you learned that on like in nursing 110. But yes, open-ended questions are phrased in a way that gathers much more information, as much information as possible. The use of phrases such as "tell me more," "describe to me," that's using a varied and rich body of information that can be assessed. So instead of saying why, you can say, well, tell me about that, or describe to me in a little more detail. That's an alternate way of saying why. Yeah?
Is the implication that if it's not as oriented, that you may have to use more closing questions to be more direct?
Sometimes you have to ask more direct questions. Like the guy with the red kit, like I was a little more direct, like, so what's the deal with you having all this stuff? And he was very evasive in his answer. So you heard about the women they found in New York, right? They found a bunch of women in New York duct taped together. Came up on shore in the Hudson River. I'm a little curious as to why that guy's running away from New York now. You know, that duct tape. I want to be like, were you duct taping women together?
How many women?
They found 2 duct taped together. But then I might not be cool like